How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. This is part 2 of Urban Rubble bases. If you didn't see part 1, you can check it out right here. Now, we're going to paint the bases today, but it's come to my attention that a lot of people don't like painting their bases. They find it tedious and stressful. This often leaves people with bases that are barren, empty, and black. But this doesn't need to be the case. Bases can be fun, they can be easy, and most of all, they can be relaxing. So grab your comfiest robe and join me. I'll show you how it's done. Okay, first up, you're going to need paints. I used a lot of Vallejo paints on this project, but I'll have the Citadel equivalent right up here. Next up, you're going to need brushes. A variety of just normal brushes and dry brushes, anything you got. And lastly, this will be completely optional, but weathering pigments. They're a lot of fun to use, so I'd highly suggest them, but they are completely optional. Okay, first things first, we got to prime the base. Usually I'd use a rattle can for this, but it's raining in California, so I had to take it inside and use the airbrush. Black or gray would be both great colors to prime this in. You just want to make sure you get in all those little nooks and crannies that we created. If you guys look closely, you might notice I included a little piece of barbed wire from Garrett's tutorial that he did last week. Okay, with the priming done, we're ready to move on to the base coats. For the stone, I'm using Vallejo Cold Gray, and for the dirt, I'm using Vallejo Charred Brown. You're going to notice that I mix these up rather thin, and I just kind of slop them on. You don't have to be neat at this stage, we're just looking for coverage. If the coats are uneven, great. Concrete isn't this uniform, perfect color like maybe a piece of armor would be, so don't worry about it being perfect. Just make sure they're thin so you don't have any ugly brush marks. With that said, the paint is pretty thin, so you're going to probably give it 2 to 3 coats. With the base coats done, we're ready to move on to a wash. Any black wash will do. In this case, I'm using Citadel's Nuln Oil. As you're going to see, I'm going to apply it quite liberally all over the base. Like I said, bases are supposed to be fun and easy, so don't worry about this getting everywhere. It'll get cleaned up in the next few stages. Next up, we have to dry brush the base. For this, I'm using Vallejo Stonewall Gray. Now you're going to notice that I leave a decent amount of paint still on the brush. This is because we have to bring the color back up after we washed it down so dark. You might also notice that I'm using an eyeshadow brush. These cheap makeup brushes are ideal for painting miniatures. They have soft curved tips, which is going to lessen the likelihood of you getting those ugly streak marks that you can sometimes get when dry brushing, and they're also going to give you a lot smoother blends. I would probably never go back to the standard dry brush after using these. If you're curious about them, I have a link for them in the description below. Moving on, we're going to do some lighter dry brushing. For this, we're using Vallejo Ghost Gray. This Ghost Gray is a really light gray, so we're going to want to make sure to wipe as much as we can off the brush and just focus on the edges, giving the base kind of this nice edge highlight. Last up for the dry brushing is a little bit of pure white. You're going to want to wipe nearly all the paint off the brush and just hit a couple edges. Sometimes you'll see concrete has this white powdery residue on the edges, and this could be calcium deposits, I don't know, I'm no concrete scientist, but this kind of replicates that. Now it's time to get weird with some washes. I know this is going to look a little strange, but just follow me here. So you're going to get some of your washes and you're just going to put a little bit on your finger. Then you'll just rub it on the base. If it's too thick, rub some of it off. This is going to give you a nice varied effect on your base. Concrete isn't just solid gray. There's brown marks, there's dirt, there's rust, and this kind of helps replicate that effect. In fact, if you've just been doing the plain, boring gray rocks on your bases, try doing this technique with those too. It's going to add some character and some realism to them. Okay, one last step of finger painting, then I swear we'll go back to being civilized people and using brushes. We're going to grab some of that white paint and we're just going to smear it on and really lightly and give it that calcium effect I was talking about earlier in the video. Like I said earlier, if you get too much on, just rub it off with your thumb till it comes off. Now we're ready to paint everything that's going to be metal. I'm using Vallejo Chainmail metal. You're going to want to use a pretty bright silver because we're going to really dirty it up in the next few steps. And we're going to want to make sure that we're doing a little bit more precision brushwork than we were doing earlier because we don't want to get this silver all over the concrete we just finished. Go ahead and grab your silver and paint everything that's supposed to be metal with 2 thin coats. Okay, next up we're going to add some rust. For this I'm using Citadel's Typhus Corrosion. This technical paint is super cool. It has these little grains in it, so whenever you paint something with it, it gives that bumpy texture that you see whenever you see rusted out metal. So go ahead, apply a nice thick coat of this to everything that's meant to be metal, and just let it dry. With Typhus Corrosion dry, we're moving on to some weathering pigments. Now if you don't have any of these, Citadel's Ryza Rust actually works really well. I just ran out and have forgot to order more of it, so I'm using these, which work just as well. Grab one of your brushes and just sprinkle this stuff on anywhere where you want it to look a little more rusted out. Now I'm going to use a little bit lighter of a rust pigment and just hit the very tops of the metal surfaces. So some of you guys might be wondering, weathering pigments, I haven't seen these before, it must be some kind of advanced technique. That couldn't be further from the truth. These things are super easy to use. If you put too much on, you just wipe it off. If you want more, you just sprinkle more on. They're really easy to use, guys. I really suggest getting into them. Moving on to our last step of rust, we're going to get that light rust pigment or Ryza Rust, like I said, they both work, and we're going to add some water to it. We're going to make it into kind of like a slurry, and you're going to take that slurry and you're just going to put it in any of the little scratches, some of the little pinholes, and you're just going to make it look like these little cracks and crevices accumulated some rusty water. I know this is going to go on kind of bright orange, but whenever it dries, it kind of mellows out. Last up for the weathering pigments is slate gray. Now guys, remember these are completely optional, you don't need them, but I do think they look pretty cool. This stuff looks a little bit like concrete dust, so I kind of slather it all around and let it fill in a little bit of the cracks. You can also add this to the boots or the feet of your model, so it helps incorporate them to the base. Okay guys, the final step in this base is painting that skull. I like to use Vallejo Khaki, wash it down with Agrix Earthshade, and dry brush it up with Vallejo Bone White. Now you can use whatever method or formula you have for bones. This is more of a tutorial for bases. If you want a tutorial for bones, I can do that later, but I'm just going to kind of breeze through that. If you guys remember from part 1 of Urban Rubble bases, in the thumbnail there was this ooze coming out of the pipe. Now this base doesn't really have room for it, but I'm going to show you how to make it anyways. So first you're going to get some Vallejo water texture and you're going to add some paint to it. Depending on what color you want the water to be, you could add blues, browns, greens, rust colors. In this case I'm adding a little bit of goblin green. You just mix it together and apply it to the base. This does take a little bit of time to dry, and it is best to apply it in thin layers. And there you guys have it, the base is done. For the final step, I'm just going to add some black around the rim and put the model on it. Now our model is tearing through a war-torn city. I hope you found this video useful and saw that bases are nothing to stress about. If you did, please hit the like and subscribe button, and remember, every item in this video will be in the description. If you buy anything from those links, you don't pay anything extra, but a small portion does get kicked back to the channel. As always, thank you for your time, and take care.